The words came out cracked and broken, like autumn leaves crushed underfoot. Dr. Samuel Whitehorse had never heard such defeat in a healer's voice. Not in 40 years of practicing medicine on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Our medicine is failing. Sir, the confession hung in the sterile air of the tribal health clinic, heavy with the weight of generations. Outside, the South Dakota wind rattled the windows of the small building, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant rumble of thunder over the Badlands. Dr. Whitehorse set down his clipboard and looked across the cramped office at the 7 figures seated before him. They were the most respected traditional healers on the reservation, men and women whose knowledge had been passed down through bloodlines that stretched back centuries. Their weathered faces bore the marks of countless ceremonies, countless prayers offered to the Great Spirit for the healing of their people. Yet today, each face carried something Dr. Whitehorse had never seen before: helplessness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Joseph Crowfeather spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. At 73, he was the eldest among them, his long silver braids falling over shoulders that had once been broad and strong. Now they seemed to carry the weight of every patient he couldn't save, every ritual that had failed to bring relief. "The children are still dying, Dr. Whitehorse," Joseph said, his dark eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights above. "The diabetes, the cancer, the diseases that eat them from the inside out. We burn the sweetgrass, we sing the old songs, we offer tobacco to the 4 directions, but they keep dying." Maria Blackbird shifted in her chair, the beadwork on her traditional dress catching the light. She had been practicing the healing arts for over 50 years, learning from her grandmother who had learned from hers. Her hands, once steady as she prepared medicine bundles and conducted purification ceremonies, now trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "Last week, we lost 3 more, she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Little ones, Dr. Whitehorse, 7 years old, 9 years old, 12 years old. Their families brought them to us first, as they always do. We tried everything: the sweat lodge ceremonies, the herbal treatments, the sacred songs. But the sickness was stronger than our medicine." Robert Standing Bear, a man in his 50s whose presence usually commanded respect in any room, stared at the floor as he spoke. "My own grandson," he said quietly. "Tommy, 15 years old. The cancer spread through his bones like wildfire. I performed every healing ritual I knew. I fasted for 7 days, seeking visions from the spirits. I called upon every ancestor, every sacred power I could reach." He looked up then, and Dr. Whitehorse saw tears threatening to spill from his eyes. "He died holding my hand, asking me why the medicine wasn't working." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Whitehorse had worked with these healers for decades, had seen them perform what could only be described as miracles. He had witnessed terminally ill patients recover after traditional ceremonies, had seen broken bones heal faster than medical science suggested possible, had watched mental illnesses fade away after spiritual cleansings. These were not charlatans or frauds, they were genuine practitioners of an ancient healing tradition that had sustained their people for millennia. Yet something had changed in recent years. The old medicine, once so powerful, seemed to be losing its effectiveness against the modern diseases plaguing the reservation. Diabetes rates had skyrocketed, cancer diagnoses were becoming increasingly common, and addiction was tearing families apart. The traditional remedies that had once been so reliable were failing with increasing frequency. Elena Spotted Horse, the youngest of the group at 42, finally broke the silence. "We've been meeting in secret for months now," she admitted. 7 of us, representing different clans, different medicine societies. We've shared our knowledge, combined our rituals, tried everything we could think of, but the results keep getting worse. She pulled a small notebook from her bag, its pages filled with careful handwriting. We've kept records, she continued. Success rates, recovery times, patient outcomes. The numbers don't lie, Dr. Whitehorse. Our healing ceremonies are working less than 30% of the time now. 5 years ago, it was closer to 70%. Thomas Red Cloud, a man whose grandfather had fought alongside the famous chief of the same name, leaned forward in his chair. His voice was steady, but Dr. Whitehorse could hear the pain beneath the words. We've considered that maybe the spirits are angry with us, he said. Maybe we've done something wrong, broken some sacred protocol. So we purified ourselves, underwent cleansing ceremonies, sought guidance from the elders. But nothing changed. We've also wondered if the land itself is sick, added Sarah Windwalker, her voice barely audible. The water contaminated, the air poisoned by the industries that surround us. Maybe that's why our plant medicines aren't working like they used to. Maybe the earth can't give us what it once did. Dr. Whitehorse nodded slowly. He had seen the environmental studies, knew about the uranium mining that had poisoned groundwater on many reservations, understood the impact of industrial pollution on traditional plant life. It was a theory that made sense from both a medical and spiritual perspective. But David Iron Shell, the last of the 7 healers, shook his head. I've tested that theory, he said, his engineer's mind always seeking logical explanations. He was one of the few healers who had also pursued formal education, earning a degree in environmental science before returning to the reservation to practice traditional medicine. I've traveled to remote areas, gathered plants from pristine locations, prepared medicines using only traditional methods with clean water and unpolluted ingredients. The results were the same. The room fell silent again as the weight of their collective failure settled over them. These were people who had dedicated their lives to healing, who had sacrificed personal comfort and modern conveniences to maintain the old ways. They had endured ridicule from outsiders, skepticism from their own younger generation, and the constant pressure to abandon their traditions in favor of modern medicine. Yet they had persevered because they had seen the power of their medicine firsthand. They had witnessed healings that defied scientific explanation, had felt the presence of spiritual forces during their ceremonies, had experienced the deep connection between mind, body, and spirit that formed the foundation of their practice. Now, that foundation seemed to be crumbling beneath their feet. Joseph Crowfeather's voice cracked as he continued his confession. We've failed our people, Dr. Whitehorse. The ancestors entrusted us with this knowledge, and we've proven unworthy of it. The children are suffering, the families are desperate, and we have nothing left to offer them. Dr. Whitehorse felt his heartbreak for these dedicated healers. He had tremendous respect for their knowledge and their commitment to their people. He had also seen the gaps in what modern medicine could provide, the lack of cultural understanding, the impersonal nature of hospital treatments, the way Western medicine often treated symptoms while ignoring the spiritual and emotional aspects of illness. What are you asking of me? He said finally. Maria Blackbird looked up at him with eyes that held both desperation and hope. We need to find another way, she said. We've heard stories, Dr. Whitehorse, whispers about someone in the mountains who might be able to help. Someone who understands both the old ways and something ... more. Elena's spotted horse opened her notebook again, flipping to a page near the back. 3 months ago, I was visiting my sister in Colorado, she said. I met an old Lakota woman there, someone who had left the reservation decades ago. She told me about a man who lives high in the Rocky Mountains, someone she called the Mountain Lord. She said he had knowledge that went beyond what any of us had ever learned. Robert's standing bear shifted uncomfortably. We know how it sounds, he said, like we're chasing ghost stories and legends. But we've exhausted every other option. We've consulted with healers from other tribes. We've studied with medicine people as far away as Mexico and Canada. Nothing has restored the power our medicine once had. Thomas Red Cloud reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The old woman gave Elena directions, he said. Not to his exact location, but to a place where we might be able to find him. She said he doesn't seek students, but sometimes he accepts those who are truly desperate, truly committed to healing. Sarah Windwalker's voice was barely a whisper as she added, she also warned us that his methods are unconventional, that he demands everything from those who would learn from him. She said many have tried to find him, but few have been deemed worthy of his teaching. Dr. Whitehorse studied the faces before him, seeing the mixture of hope and fear in their expressions. These were rational people, grounded in both spiritual tradition and practical experience. If they were willing to pursue what sounded like a fairy tale, their desperation must be profound indeed. And you want me to come with you, he said. It wasn't a question. David Ironshell nodded. You understand both worlds, Dr. Whitehorse. You respect our traditions, but you also have the medical knowledge to evaluate whatever we might learn. And ... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. We trust you. If this mountain lord is real, if he truly has knowledge that could help our people, we need someone we trust to witness it, to help us determine if it's legitimate or just another false hope. The wind outside had grown stronger, rattling the windows more insistently. In the distance, Dr. Whitehorse could hear the sound of children playing in the reservation schoolyard, their laughter carrying on the air like a prayer. How many of those children would he lose to preventable diseases in the coming years? How many families would he watch torn apart by illnesses that seemed to resist every treatment, both traditional and modern? He looked at the 7 healers again, seeing not just their individual faces, but the weight of their collective knowledge and experience. They represented hundreds of years of accumulated wisdom, generations of healing practice passed down through oral tradition. If they believed their medicine was failing, if they were willing to risk everything to find a solution, then perhaps it was worth investigating this mysterious mountain lord. When do we leave? He asked quietly. The relief that washed over their faces was palpable. Joseph Crowfeather straightened in his chair for the first time since entering the office. Tomorrow morning, he said. We've already made arrangements to close our practices temporarily. This journey, we don't know how long it will take. As the healers filed out of his office, each thanking him with quiet dignity, Dr. Whitehorse stood at the window and watched the sunset over the reservation. The golden light painted the landscape in warm hues, but he could see the signs of struggle everywhere. The rundown housing, the boarded-up buildings, the too thin children walking home from school. Tomorrow, he would begin a journey that might lead nowhere, chasing the ghost of a man who might not even exist. But tonight, for the first time in months, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The confession of the 7 healers had shattered his understanding of their world. But from that brokenness, a new possibility was emerging. In the mountains of Colorado, a secretive figure waited, someone who might hold the key to restoring the healing power that these dedicated people so desperately needed. The wind carried the sound of drumming from somewhere deep in the reservation, the ancient rhythm calling to something primal in his soul. Dr. Whitehorse closed his eyes and made a silent prayer to whatever forces governed healing and hope, asking for guidance on the journey ahead. The confession was complete. The journey was about to begin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn broke over the Black Hills like a copper coin tossed against the sky, and Dr. Samuel Whitehorse found himself standing beside a convoy of 3 weathered pickup trucks, each loaded with supplies that spoke of a journey into the unknown. The crisp October air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, while somewhere in the distance, an eagle's cry pierced the morning silence. The 7 healers moved with quiet efficiency around their vehicles, each carrying bundles wrapped in traditional cloth alongside modern camping gear. Joseph Crow Feather secured a leather medicine bag to his belt with the same care another man might handle explosives. Maria Blackbird whispered prayers over a collection of sacred stones, their surfaces polished smooth by generations of handling. The weight of their desperate mission pressed against the morning calm like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. The old woman said we'd know when we found the right valley, Elena's spotted horse said, consulting a hand-drawn map that looked more like a work of art than a navigation tool. Strange symbols marked certain locations, some resembling traditional Native American pictographs, others unlike anything Dr. Whitehorse had ever seen. She described landmarks that can't be found on any government survey. Rock formations that cast shadows in specific patterns, springs that flow upward instead of down. Robert Standing Bear loaded the last of the water containers into his truck bed, his movements deliberate and measured. My grandfather used to tell stories about such places, he said, his breath visible in the cold air. Sacred sites where the normal rules don't apply, where the spirit world bleeds through into ours. I always thought they were metaphors until I started practicing the healing arts myself. Thomas Red Cloud approached Dr. Whitehorse, carrying what appeared to be a modern GPS device, alongside a collection of traditional navigation tools, a compass made from magnetized bone, stones arranged in patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, and strips of leather marked with notches and symbols. We'll need both the old ways and the new to find this place, Thomas explained, noting Dr. Whitehorse's curious expression. The woman warned us that conventional maps would be useless once we reached the high country. The mountains themselves are said to hide the path from those who aren't truly seeking healing knowledge. David Iron Shell emerged from beneath the hood of the lead vehicle, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. His engineering background showed in the meticulous way he had prepared their transportation: extra radiator fluid for high-altitude driving, modified air intake systems, reinforced suspension components. Yet attached to his rearview mirror hung a small medicine bundle, its beadwork catching the early morning light. Vehicles are ready for mountain conditions, he reported. But I've also prepared offerings for the spirits of the high places. My grandmother always said you never enter sacred territory without permission from those who guard it. Dr. Whitehorse checked his own pack one final time, ensuring he had packed both his medical supplies and the items the healers had requested. He bring white sage for purification, tobacco for offerings, and a small piece of pipestone from the sacred quarries. In Minnesota, the fusion of medical science and spiritual practice felt surreal, yet somehow necessary for the journey ahead. As they prepared to depart, Sarah Wind Walker gathered the group in a circle beside the lead truck. Her voice carried the weight of ritual as she spoke words in Lakota, then translated for Dr. Whitehorse's benefit. We ask the spirits of the four directions to guide our path, she said, sprinkling tobacco to the east, south, west, and north. We ask our ancestors to watch over us as we seek the knowledge needed to heal our people. We ask the Great Spirit to make us worthy of whatever wisdom we may encounter in the high places. The ceremony was brief but profound, each word carrying the accumulated power of countless generations. Dr. Whitehorse felt something shift in the air around them, a subtle change in pressure that had nothing to do with weather patterns. Whatever they were embarking upon was more than a simple journey. It was a pilgrimage into the unknown. The convoy pulled away from the reservation as the sun climbed higher, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Dr. Whitehorse rode with Elena and Maria in the middle vehicle, their conversation flowing between English and Lakota as they shared stories of healings they had witnessed in their younger years. There was a time when our medicine worked like magic, Maria said, her eyes distant with memory. I remember treating a young man who had been thrown from a horse, his back broken in 3 places. The doctors at the Indian Health Service hospital said he would never walk again. But after 7 days of ceremony, 7 nights of singing the healing songs, he stood up and danced at the next powwow. Elena nodded, steering carefully around a pothole. My grandmother could cure tuberculosis with plant medicines and prayer. She saved dozens of people during the epidemic of 1963, when the government doctors had given up hope. But when I tried to use the same methods on TB patients last year, only 1 in 5 recovered. The landscape began to change as they drove west, the rolling hills of South Dakota giving way to the more dramatic terrain of Wyoming. Mesas rose like ancient fortresses from the plains, their red rock walls bearing the scars of millions of years of wind and water. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals that carried the scent of sage and juniper across vast distances. At their first rest stop, beside a stream that sparkled like liquid silver in the afternoon sun, the healers shared a meal of traditional foods: fry bread, buffalo jerky, and wild berries preserved in pemmican. Dr. Whitehorse found himself thinking about the contrast between this simple, nourishing fare and the processed foods that dominated reservation life today. Diet is part of it, David Ironshell said, as if reading his thoughts. Our people lived on these foods for thousands of years, and our medicine was developed for bodies nourished by what the land provided naturally. Now we're trying to heal diabetes and heart disease in people whose bodies have been poisoned by government commodity foods and fast food restaurants. Joseph Crow Feather sat on a fallen log beside the stream, his weathered hands tracing patterns in the sand. But it's more than diet, he said quietly. The old woman in Colorado told Elena, something that's been bothering me ever since. She said the sickness affecting our medicine comes from a disconnection, not just from the land, but from something deeper. Something that was broken when our people were forced onto reservations, when the sacred sites were taken from us. Thomas. Red Cloud looked up from where he was consulting his collection of navigation tools. The mountain man this lord we're seeking, she said, he understands that disconnection, that he's found a way to heal it, to restore the broken connections between healer and patient, between medicine and spirit, between the people and the land. As the afternoon wore on, the terrain became more challenging. They climbed through forests of pine and aspen, the air growing thinner with each mile gained in elevation. The trucks labored up steep grades, their engines working hard against gravity and the decreasing oxygen content of the mountain air. It was Maria who first noticed the strangeness beginning to manifest around them. "Look at the trees," she said, pointing to a grove of aspens whose leaves were changing color in a pattern that defied the normal progression of autumn. Instead of the typical golden yellow, some leaves showed deep reds and purples that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Dr. Whitehorse studied the phenomenon with his medical training, searching for a scientific explanation. Perhaps it was a mineral deficiency in the soil, or the effects of high altitude on the tree's metabolism. But as they drove deeper into the mountains, more anomalies appeared: streams that flowed uphill for short distances before resuming their normal downward course, rock formations that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, and shadows that fell in directions that contradicted the position of the sun. "We're entering the threshold zone," Elena said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "The old woman said this would happen as we approached the mountain lord's territory. The normal laws begin to bend here, making room for older, deeper truths." Robert Standing Bear's truck led them onto an unmarked dirt road that seemed to appear from nowhere, its path winding through stands of ancient timber toward peaks shrouded in clouds. The GPS devices in all 3 vehicles had stopped functioning an hour earlier, their screens showing only static or impossible readings that placed them simultaneously in multiple locations. "We're relying entirely on traditional navigation now," Thomas reported over the radio. "The bone compass is still working, but it's pointing toward something that isn't magnetic north, something that pulls at it like iron draws to a magnet." As evening approached, They made camp in a meadow beside a lake that reflected the surrounding peaks with impossible clarity. The water was so clear that Dr. Whitehorse could see fish swimming at depths that should have been beyond visual range, their scales glinting like jewels in the fading light. The healers performed their evening prayers with extra reverence, clearly sensing that they were in a place of power. The smoke from their sage bundles rose straight up into the still air, forming spirals that seemed to carry their intentions toward the star-filled sky. "Tomorrow we reach the valley the old woman described," Sarah Windwalker said as they gathered around their small campfire. "She said we would know it by the way sound travels there, how whispers can be heard across great distances, while shouts are swallowed by silence." David Iron Shell added more wood to the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. "She also said we might not all be deemed worthy to meet the Mountain Lord, that he chooses his students based on criteria we might not understand." Dr. Whitehorse felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. They had traveled hundreds of miles based on the words of an elderly woman they had met only once, following directions that seemed to blend folklore with navigation, seeking a man who might be nothing more than legend. Yet the evidence of their own senses suggested they were entering a realm where legends might walk among the living. As the fire burned lower and the healers settled into their sleeping bags, Dr. Whitehorse lay awake, studying the star-filled sky. The constellations seemed brighter here, more vivid than he had ever seen them. And unless his eyes were playing tricks on him, some of the star patterns appeared to be moving, shifting into configurations that spoke to something deep within. His subconscious. Somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp, an owl called with a voice that sounded almost human. The healers stirred in their sleep, and Joseph Crow Feather muttered words in Lakota that Dr. Whitehorse couldn't understand, but which seemed to carry the weight of prophecy. Tomorrow would bring them face to face with whatever truth lay hidden in these mountains. Tonight, suspended between the known world and the mystery ahead, Dr. Whitehorse finally understood why the 7 healers had been willing to risk everything on this quest. Their medicine was failing because the world itself had changed. Because the connections that gave power to healing had been severed by forces beyond their understanding. If the Mountain Lord truly existed, if he truly possessed knowledge that could restore those broken connections, then this journey was not just about saving their healing traditions. It was about saving their people's very souls. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the high peaks that surrounded them, a presence stirred, ancient, powerful, and waiting. The mist clung to the valley floor like the breath of sleeping giants, swirling in patterns that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Dr. Samuel Whitehorse stood at the edge of what the old woman had called the Valley of Echoes, watching as their 3 trucks descended a winding path that hadn't existed on any map they'd consulted. The road itself seemed to materialize ahead of them and fade behind them, as if it existed only in the present moment of their passage. "Stop here," Thomas Red Cloud's voice crackled over the radio from the lead vehicle. "We need to proceed on foot from this point." As they climbed out of their trucks, the silence hit them like a physical force. Not the peaceful quiet of wilderness, but something deeper, an absence of sound so complete that their own heartbeats seemed thunderous in their ears. Even the slamming of truck doors produced no echo, the sound swallowed instantly by the strange acoustics of the valley. Elena Spotted Horse whispered something in Lakota to Maria Blackbird, and her words carried across the 100 yards, separating them as clearly as if she had spoken directly into their ears. Yet when David Iron Shell called out in a normal voice, asking about their equipment, his words seemed to disappear entirely, lost in the mist before they could travel more than a few feet. "The old woman was right about this place," Robert Standing Bear said, his voice barely audible despite standing close to Dr. Whitehorse. "Sound follows different rules here. It responds to intention rather than volume, to meaning rather than mere noise." They gathered their essential supplies, medical equipment, traditional healing items, food for several days, and sleeping gear. The trucks would remain at the valley's entrance, though Dr. Whitehorse suspected they would be invisible to any other travelers who might pass this way. The valley seemed to exist in a pocket dimension, connected to the ordinary world, but separate. From it, Joseph Crow Feather led them along a path marked by stones, arranged in patterns that resembled traditional medicine wheels, but incorporated symbols none of them recognized. The stones themselves seemed ordinary enough: granite, quartzite, and sandstone worn smooth by time and weather. Yet they hummed with a subtle energy that made the hair on Dr. Whitehorse's arms stand on end. As they walked deeper into the valley, the landscape revealed itself in layers. What had appeared from above to be a simple meadow surrounded by forested slopes turned out to be a complex ecosystem unlike anything Dr. Whitehorse had studied in medical school or encountered in his decades of practice. Plants grew in impossible combinations: desert cacti thriving alongside mountain pines, tropical flowers blooming in soil that should have been too cold and dry to support them. "Look at this," Sarah Windwalker called softly, her voice carrying perfectly despite the distance. She knelt beside a stream where the water flowed in multiple directions simultaneously, some currents moving uphill while others followed the normal downward slope. Where the conflicting flows met, small whirlpools formed that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Like liquid heartbeats, Maria Blackbird approached the stream with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space. She dipped her fingers into the water and brought them to her lips, tasting what she found there. Her eyes widened in recognition. "This water carries medicine," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Not just minerals or natural properties, but actual healing energy. I can feel it working through my body, repairing damage I didn't even know existed." Dr. Whitehorse's scientific training compelled him to test the water himself. As a medical professional, he knew the dangers of drinking from unknown sources. But something about this place seemed to operate beyond conventional concerns about contamination or disease. The water was unlike anything he had ever tasted, pure in a way that went beyond simple chemical analysis, carrying within it a vitality that seemed to awaken every cell in his body. They filled their water bottles from the stream, each person experiencing a subtle but unmistakable improvement in their physical condition. The arthritis that had plagued Joseph Crow Feather's joints for years seemed to ease with each sip. Elena's chronic fatigue, a legacy of working double shifts at the tribal clinic, lifted like fog before the morning sun. "We're being prepared," Thomas Red Cloud observed, consulting his bone compass. The ancient instrument spun wildly for a moment, before settling on a direction that led deeper into the valley, toward a series of rock formations that resembled natural amphitheaters. "This place is healing us, making us ready for whatever comes next." As they continued their journey, they began to encounter signs of human presence, not recent habitation, but evidence of long occupation by people who understood the valley's unique properties. Stone circles marked locations where fires had been built according to patterns that maximized the healing properties of the smoke. Gardens showed evidence of cultivation techniques that worked with the land's natural energy flows rather than against them. "Someone has been teaching people here for a very long time," David Iron Shell said, examining a series of symbols carved into a boulder. The markings were weathered but still legible, showing a progression of increasingly complex designs that seemed to tell a story of healing. Knowledge passed from teacher to student across generations. Dr. Whitehorse studied the carvings with the eye of someone trained to observe and diagnose. The symbols weren't random decorative elements, but appeared to be a form of medical notation, showing the relationship between different healing techniques and their applications. Some resembled traditional Native American pictographs, while others incorporated elements he recognized from Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and healing traditions from cultures around the world. "Whoever lives here has been learning from everyone who seeks him out," he said. "These carvings show influences from dozens of different healing traditions, all integrated into something new. The path led them through a grove of trees whose trunks had grown in spirals, their bark marked with natural patterns that seemed to pulse with subtle light. As they walked among these trees, Dr. Whitehorse felt his perception shifting in ways that had nothing to do with altitude or fatigue. Colors became more vivid, sounds more distinct, and his awareness of the life force flowing through every living thing around them intensified dramatically. Robert, standing bare, stopped abruptly, his hand raised in a gesture that brought the entire group to immediate stillness. "Someone's watching us," he said quietly. Not with hostile intent, but evaluating, measuring our worthiness. They stood motionless among the spiral trees, senses extended, searching for any sign of the presence Robert had detected. Dr. Whitehorse felt it too, not sight or sound, but a weight of attention focused on them with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. Whatever was observing them possessed a level of awareness that seemed to penetrate to their deepest motivations and intentions. A voice spoke from the trees, though no speaker was visible. The words seemed to come from multiple directions at once, as if the forest itself was speaking. "Why do you seek the mountain lord?" The question hung in the air with the weight of a final examination. Joseph Crow Feather stepped forward, his 73 years giving him the authority to speak for the group. "Our medicine is failing," he said simply. "Our people are dying of diseases our ancestors never knew, and the healing knowledge passed down through generations has lost its power. We seek wisdom to restore what has been broken." "And what makes you think you deserve such wisdom?" This time it was Maria Blackbird who answered. "We don't deserve it," she said, with the honesty of someone who had looked deeply into her own heart. "We come as beggars, as failures who have exhausted every other option. We offer only our willingness to learn and our commitment to serving our people." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though Dr. Whitehorse's watch showed only minutes passing. When the voice spoke again, it carried a different quality, not the testing tone of an examiner, but the considered judgment of someone who had reached a decision. "Follow the stream to its source. You will find what you seek there. But be warned, the Mountain Lord demands everything from those who would learn his ways. Knowledge of true healing comes at a price few are willing to pay." The presence withdrew as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving them alone in the grove of spiral trees. But the direction was clear: follow the stream upstream, toward whatever source fed these healing waters. They resumed their journey with renewed purpose, knowing they were being guided toward an encounter that would change everything. The stream led them through increasingly dramatic landscape. Waterfalls cascaded down cliff faces in defiance of gravity, their spray creating rainbows that seemed to linger in the air long after the light had passed. Rock formations took on shapes that resembled vast sculptures, healing hands, protective spirits, symbols of transformation and renewal. As afternoon faded toward evening, they reached a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside. At its center stood a simple cabin built from logs that seemed to have grown rather than been cut, their surfaces smooth and alive with the slow pulse of wood that had never quite stopped being part of the tree. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, carrying the scent of burning cedar mixed with herbs Dr. Whitehorse couldn't identify. Gardens surrounded the structure, not the wild, chaotic growth they had seen elsewhere in the valley, but carefully tended plots where every plant had been placed with obvious knowledge of its healing properties and its relationship to its neighbors. "He's waiting for us," Elena said. Though no figure was visible in or around the cabin, they approached slowly, respectfully, aware that they were entering the domain of someone who had mastered knowledge they couldn't yet comprehend. The door of the cabin opened before they could knock, revealing a figure silhouetted against the warm light within. The Mountain Lord stepped into the fading daylight, and Dr. Whitehorse felt his breath catch. The man before them appeared to be in his 50s, with features that suggested mixed heritage Native American, European, perhaps Asian, as if he embodied the best genetic gifts of multiple bloodlines. But it was his eyes that commanded attention. They held depths that spoke of knowledge accumulated over far more years than his physical appearance suggested. Wisdom earned through experiences that had taken him to the very edge of human understanding and beyond. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying the same quality they had heard in the forest words that seemed to speak directly to their souls rather than merely their ears. "I am called many names by those who seek me out. You may call me Dr. Marcus Thornfield. And you," his gaze moved from one to another of their group, "are exactly who I have been expecting." He stepped aside, gesturing them into the cabin. "Come, we have much to discuss, and your real education is about to begin. The healing knowledge you seek exists, but learning it will require you to abandon everything you think you know about medicine, about the human body, and about the nature of life itself." As they crossed the threshold into the cabin, Dr. Whitehorse felt the weight of the moment. They had found the Mountain Lord, but their quest was far from over. The real journey into knowledge that might save their people or transform them, beyond recognition, was just beginning. The door closed behind them with a sound like destiny, sealing itself into place. The interior of Dr. Marcus Thornfield's cabin defied every expectation. Dr. Samuel Whitehorse had formed during their journey. Where he had anticipated the rustic simplicity of a mountain hermit's dwelling, he found instead a space that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The walls appeared to be simple log construction, yet they stretched far beyond what the exterior dimensions should have allowed. Shelves lined every surface, filled with books written in scripts he didn't recognize, alongside specimens of plants, minerals, and anatomical models that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Sit," Dr. Thornfield said, gesturing toward a circle of chairs arranged around a central fireplace. The fire burned without consuming the logs that fed it, flames dancing in colors that had no names in any earthly spectrum. "Before we begin your education, I need to understand exactly what you think you know about healing." The 7 healers arranged themselves in the circle with the unconscious precision of people who had performed many ceremonies together. Dr. Whitehorse took the remaining chair, feeling oddly like a student called to account for homework he hadn't known was assigned. Joseph Crowfeather spoke first, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "We know the traditional ways of our people," he said with quiet dignity. "The use of plant medicines, the power of ceremony and prayer, the importance of addressing spiritual imbalance alongside physical symptoms." Dr. Thornfield's eyes, which seemed to shift color in the firelight, fixed on the elderly healer with unsettling intensity. "And yet your traditional ways are failing. Why do you think that is?" The old woman in Colorado suggested it might be a disconnection, Elena spotted. Horse offered that when our people were forced under reservations, when the sacred sites were taken from us, something essential was broken. "Closer," Dr. Thornfield acknowledged, but still thinking too small. "Dr. Whitehorse," he turned to face the physician. "Directly, from your medical training, how do you understand the relationship between mind and body in the healing process?" Dr. Whitehorse felt the weight of examination in that gaze. "Modern medicine recognizes the psychosomatic component of many illnesses," he said carefully. "We know that mental state can affect physical health, that stress can suppress immune function, that belief in treatment can improve outcomes through placebo effect." "Psychosomatic," Dr. Thornfield repeated, his tone suggesting the word was barely adequate to describe what he was thinking. "Tell me, when you prescribe medication for a patient, what do you believe is actually causing the healing?" "The active compounds in the medicine interact with the body's biochemistry to counteract the disease process," Dr. Whitehorse replied, though something in Dr. Thornfield's expression suggested this answer was incomplete. Dr. Thornfield stood and moved to one of his bookshelves, retrieving what appeared to be a human skull made from some crystalline material that caught and refracted the firelight into impossible patterns. Every culture that has ever existed has developed some form of healing practice, he said, cradling the skull in his hands. Tibetan medicine, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, European herbalism, African spiritual healing, Native American ceremonies. They all work, despite being based on completely different theoretical frameworks. He set the crystalline skull on a table where it continued to pulse with soft light. The Tibetan healer believes in balancing the three humors. The Chinese doctor works with qi flowing through meridians. The Ayurvedic practitioner manipulates dashas and chakras. The African Sangoma calls upon ancestral spirits. Your traditional healers work with plant spirits and sacred energies. His gaze swept the circle, meeting each person's eyes in turn. They can't all be right about the mechanism, yet they all achieve real healing. Why? Maria Blackbird leaned forward, her intuition grasping something the others were still struggling to see. Because the mechanism isn't what we think it is, she said slowly. Because healing happens through something deeper than our understanding of how it works. Exactly. Dr. Thornfield's approval was evident in his tone. Healing is not a mechanical process of fixing broken parts. It is the restoration of coherence to a living system that has fallen into disharmony. The specific method, whether pharmaceutical, herbal, energetic, or spiritual, is far less important than the quality of consciousness that applies that method. David Iron Shell, with his engineering background, struggled with this concept. But that doesn't make scientific sense, he protested. Chemical compounds have specific effects on biological systems. You can't achieve healing through consciousness alone. Dr. Thornfield smiled, the expression both patient and challenging. Can't you? Let me show you something. He moved to another shelf and retrieved a small vial, filled with what appeared to be ordinary water. This water came from the same stream you encountered in the valley. Dr. Whitehorse, would you analyze it with your medical knowledge? What do? You observe? Dr. Whitehorse accepted the vial and examined its contents. The water appeared completely clear, with no visible impurities or unusual characteristics. Yet as he held it, he could feel the same healing energy they had all experienced at the stream. It seems to carry some kind of bioactive property, he said. But I can't identify any physical characteristic that would account for its effects. That's because you're looking for the wrong thing, Dr. Thornfield said. The healing property of this water has nothing to do with its chemical composition. It has everything to do with the intention that has been focused into it, the consciousness that has been impressed upon its molecular structure. Thomas Red Cloud spoke up, his traditional training resonating with this explanation. In our ceremonies, we bless the water, we pray over it, we ask the spirits to give it healing power. You're saying that actually changes the water itself. I'm saying that consciousness is not a byproduct of brain chemistry, as modern science assumes, Dr. Thornfield replied. Consciousness is the fundamental force that organizes matter, that gives structure to energy, that transforms chaos into order. When a healer, whether using plants, pharmaceuticals, energy work, or prayer, focuses healing intention with sufficient clarity and power, they are literally restructuring reality at the quantum level. Robert Standing Bear looked skeptical. If that's true, why has our medicine lost its power? We still perform the ceremonies with the same intention, the same dedication our ancestors had. Dr. Thornfield's expression grew somber. Because the world itself has changed in ways that disrupt the flow of healing consciousness. The electromagnetic fields generated by modern technology, the chemical contamination of air and water, the psychological stress of living disconnected from natural rhythms, all of these factors interfere with the subtle energies that traditional healing methods depend upon. He gestured toward the crystalline skull, which pulsed more brightly as if responding to the conversation. But more than that, The dominant worldview of your culture, the mechanistic, materialistic perspective that reduces everything to chemical and physical processes, creates a field of disbelief that actively works against healing consciousness. Sarah. Windwalker's voice was barely a whisper. You're saying our own doubt is poisoning our medicine. Not just your doubt, Dr. Thornfield clarified. The collective doubt of an entire civilization that has forgotten how consciousness and matter interact. When you perform a traditional healing ceremony on a reservation surrounded by people who believe only in pills and surgery, you're working against a field of skepticism that weakens your ability to focus healing intention effectively. Dr. Whitehorse felt his worldview shifting beneath him like sand. But modern medicine does work, he protested. We save lives every day with surgery, antibiotics, chemotherapy. Of course it works, Dr. Thornfield agreed. But not for the reasons you think. Modern medicine works because it operates within the belief system of the people it treats. When a patient has absolute faith in the power of a particular drug or procedure, that faith creates the coherent consciousness necessary for healing to occur. The drug or surgery becomes the focusing device for healing intention, just as sacred plants and ceremonies serve that function in traditional medicine. He moved to the fire, stirring the impossible flames with a poker that seemed to be made from crystallized light. The problem is that modern medicine has become increasingly dependent on ever more powerful interventions because the underlying consciousness of the culture has become more and more fragmented. You need stronger drugs, more invasive procedures, more dramatic interventions to achieve the same healing effects that a simple herb or prayer could accomplish in a culture where healing consciousness flowed freely. Elena Spotted Horse sat back in her chair, the implications of this explanation overwhelming her. So when our medicine started failing, it wasn't because we were doing anything wrong. It was because the whole world around us had changed in ways that made our traditional methods less effective. Precisely, Dr. Thornfield confirmed. And that's why you're here. You need to learn how to heal in a world where the natural flow of healing consciousness has been disrupted. You need to understand how to work with quantum fields, how to restructure reality at the molecular level, how to focus intention so powerfully that it can overcome the background interference of modern civilization. Joseph Crowfeather looked up at their host with ancient eyes. And you can teach us this? Dr. Thornfield's smile was enigmatic. I can teach you to remember what you already know but have forgotten. Every traditional healer carries this knowledge in their cellular memory, passed down through generations of ancestors who understood these principles intuitively. Modern civilization has simply covered over that understanding with layers of mechanical thinking. He returned to his chair, his presence seeming to fill the space around them with possibilities they couldn't yet fully grasp. But learning to access this knowledge requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires you to literally rewire your consciousness, to let go of every assumption you've made about the nature of reality, to open yourself to experiences that will challenge everything you believe about life, death, and the relationship between mind and matter. Dr. Whitehorse felt a mixture of excitement and terror at the prospect. What exactly are you asking us to do? I'm asking you to become the kind of healers this world needs, Dr. Thornfield replied. Healers who can work effectively regardless of their cultural context, who can restore coherence to living systems even in the midst of chaos and disbelief, who can focus healing consciousness so precisely that they can literally rewrite the quantum code that structures physical reality. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, its impossible flames casting shadows that seemed to dance with their own intelligence. Outside the cabin, night had fallen over the valley, but through the windows they could see stars that pulsed with the same rhythm as their own heartbeats. The training begins tomorrow, Dr. Thornfield said finally. Tonight, rest and prepare yourselves, because what you will learn in the coming days will change not just your understanding of healing, but your understanding of what it means to be human. As they settled into sleeping arrangements that the cabin somehow provided rooms that hadn't existed moments before, beds that adjusted themselves to each person's perfect comfort, Dr. Whitehorse lay awake, contemplating the magnitude of what they had undertaken. They had come seeking knowledge to restore their failing medicine. Instead, they had found someone offering to teach them how to restructure reality itself. The question that kept him awake was not whether such knowledge was possible, but whether they had the courage to embrace it fully. Outside his window, the impossible stars continued their ancient dance, and somewhere in the quantum field that connected all things, the next phase of their education was already beginning. Dawn in the Valley of Echoes arrived not with the gradual lightening of a normal sunrise, but with a sudden transformation that turned the mist-shrouded landscape into a cathedral of golden light. Dr. Samuel Whitehorse woke to find his room flooded with luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very air itself, carrying with it a vitality that made every cell in his body sing with renewed energy. The 7 healers gathered outside Dr. Thornfield's cabin to find their host waiting for them beside a garden that definitely hadn't existed the night before. Plants from every corner of the earth grew in impossible harmony. Arctic willows beside tropical orchids, desert succulents intertwined with rainforest vines, medicinal herbs from cultures separated by continents and centuries, all thriving in Povin. The same soil. Your first lesson begins now, Dr. Thornfield announced, his voice carrying easily across the garden despite speaking barely above a whisper. Everything you think you know about botany, about pharmacology, about the relationship between plants and healing is about to be challenged. He gestured toward a section of the garden where familiar plants grew in unfamiliar ways. Dr. Whitehorse recognized sage, but this sage had leaves that shifted color as they watched, cycling through silver, green, purple, and gold. Nearby, what appeared to be ordinary echinacea bloomed with flowers that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. "Maria," Dr. Thornfield called to the eldest female healer, "you've worked with plant medicines for over 50 years. Tell me, what makes a plant medicinal?" Maria Blackbird approached the transformed plants with the reverence of someone entering sacred space. "The active compounds," she said, though her voice carried uncertainty. "The alkaloids, the essential oils, the chemical constituents that affect the body's systems." "And yet," Dr. Thornfield said, reaching for a sprig of the color-shifting sage, "this plant contains no compounds that would show up on any chemical analysis. Its healing properties exist entirely in the quantum field that surrounds and interpenetrates its physical structure." He held the sage to his nose, inhaling deeply. "The consciousness of the plant, its living intelligence, is what carries the medicine." David Iron Shell's engineering mind rebelled against this explanation. "Plants don't have consciousness," he protested. "They're biological machines that convert sunlight into chemical energy through photosynthesis." Dr. Thornfield's smile was patient but challenging. "Touch this vine," he said, indicating a spiral of green that had wrapped itself around a trellis in patterns too perfect to be random. "Place your hand on it and tell me what you experience." David approached skeptically, but as his palm made contact with the vine, his expression changed dramatically. His eyes widened, then closed as if he was listening to something only he could hear. When he opened them again, wonder had replaced skepticism. "It's aware," he whispered. "Not just alive, but actually conscious. I can feel it responding to my touch, communicating something I don't have words for. Every plant in this garden is a living being with its own form of consciousness," Dr. Thornfield explained. "When traditional healers work with plant medicines, they're not just using chemical compounds, they're entering into relationship with intelligent beings who choose to share their healing gifts with humans." Thomas Red Cloud nodded slowly, his traditional training resonating with this explanation. "My grandmother always said we had to ask permission from the plants before harvesting them for medicine. She said they would tell us how to use them, what they were good for, how much to take. Your grandmother understood something that modern pharmacology has forgotten, Dr. Thornfield said. The relationship between healer, patient, and plant medicine is a three-way communication. The plant's consciousness adapts its healing properties to the specific needs of each individual patient, guided by the focused intention of the healer. He led them deeper into the garden, where they encountered plants that defied every botanical classification system ever devised. Trees that bore fruit from multiple species simultaneously, flowers that sang audible harmonies when the wind touched them, roots that glowed with bioluminescence that pulsed in rhythm with the observer's heartbeat. This is what happens when plants are grown in an environment where their natural consciousness is not suppressed by the mechanistic thinking that dominates modern agriculture. Dr. Thornfield explained. When they're allowed to express their full potential, plants become partners in healing rather than mere sources of chemical compounds. Elena's spotted horse reached toward a flower that seemed to be made of crystallized light, then hesitated. Is it safe to touch? Safety is the wrong question, Dr. Thornfield replied. The right question is, are you ready to expand your understanding of what plants can be, what medicine can accomplish, what healing can look like when it's not constrained by limiting beliefs about the nature of life? Elena placed her hand gently on the crystalline flower and gasped as waves of information flowed through her awareness. Images flooded her mind, visions of healing techniques from cultures she'd never studied, understanding of disease processes that went far beyond anything taught in medical schools, knowledge of the quantum mechanisms through which consciousness could literally restructure matter at the cellular level. What did you just experience? Dr. Thornfield asked gently. Information, Elena breathed, her voice filled with awe. Not just about this plant, but about healing itself. Like the flower was downloading knowledge directly into my consciousness. Because that's exactly what happened, Dr. Thornfield confirmed. Plants are living libraries of healing wisdom. When you approach them with the right consciousness, with respect, with openness, with genuine desire to learn, they can transfer their knowledge directly to your awareness without requiring years of study or experimentation. Robert Standing Bear looked around the garden with new eyes. You're saying that every traditional healer who ever lived was accessing this kind of direct knowledge transfer from plant teachers? The most effective ones, yes, Dr. Thornfield sighed. The shamans who could cure incurable diseases, the medicine women who could heal with a touch, the herbalists whose remedies worked like magic, they all understood how to communicate directly with plant consciousness. Joseph Crow Feathers spoke up, his voice heavy with the weight of lost knowledge. And we've forgotten how to do this? Not forgotten, been systematically taught to disbelieve it's possible, Dr. Thornfield corrected. Modern education, modern medicine, modern culture all operate on the assumption that consciousness is limited to human brains, that plants are unconscious biological machines, that healing must work through purely physical mechanisms. He gestured toward a section of the garden where ordinary-looking plants grew in extraordinary patterns, spirals that seemed to generate their own energy fields, geometric arrangements that created standing waves of healing frequency. But consciousness is not produced by brains. Consciousness is the fundamental organizing principle of the universe. Everything that exists, from subatomic particles to galaxies, possesses some form of awareness appropriate to its level of organization. Sarah Wind Walker approached a group of plants arranged in a perfect mandala pattern, feeling the energy field they generated as a tingling sensation on her skin. How do we learn to communicate with them? The same way you learn to communicate with anything, Dr. Thornfield replied. By listening, by paying attention, by approaching with genuine respect and curiosity rather than the desire to exploit or control. He led them to the center of the garden, where a single plant grew in splendid isolation, something that looked like a cross between a rose and a lotus, with petals that seemed to be made of pure light. This is what I call the teacher plant. He said, it carries within its consciousness the accumulated healing wisdom of every medicinal plant that has ever existed on Earth. Dr. Whitehorse stared at the impossible flower. That's not scientifically possible. Science is a tool for understanding reality, Dr. Thornfield said. But it's not the only tool, and it's certainly not the most complete one. The consciousness-based understanding of healing that we're exploring here operates according to principles that quantum physics is just beginning to recognize: non-locality, entanglement, the observer effect, the role of consciousness in collapsing probability waves into manifest reality. He gestured for them to sit in a circle around the teacher plant. For your first practical lesson, I want each of you to make contact with this plant's consciousness. Don't try to think your way into communication. Thinking is a function of the limited ego mind. Instead, expand your awareness beyond the boundaries of your individual identity and allow yourself to merge temporarily with the plant's field of consciousness. Maria Blackbird looked uncertain. How do we do that? The same way you enter into communion with the spirits during your traditional ceremonies, Dr. Thornfield said. Through focused intention, through openness, through the willingness to temporarily dissolve the boundaries between self and other. They arranged themselves in a circle, each person sitting cross-legged on the soft earth of the garden. The teacher plant pulsed with gentle light at their center, its impossible petals seeming to breathe with their own rhythm. Dr. Thornfield began to chant in a language none of them recognized, words that seemed to resonate directly with their cellular structure. As the chanting continued, Dr. Whitehorse felt his normal analytical consciousness beginning to dissolve. The boundaries between his awareness and the world around him became fluid, permeable. He could feel the life force flowing through every plant in the garden, could sense the vast network of communication that connected all living things. Then, suddenly, he was no longer sitting in the garden, but somehow inside the consciousness of the teacher plant itself. Information flooded through him, not words or images, but direct knowing. He understood how healing worked at the quantum level, how consciousness could restructure matter, how the right combination of intention and natural intelligence could literally rewrite the genetic code of disease cells around him. He could sense the other healers having similar experiences. Elena was learning about energy meridians that conventional acupuncture had never mapped. Thomas was discovering how traditional ceremonies could be modified to work more effectively in the modern world. Maria was receiving formulas for plant medicines that could cure diseases that didn't even have names yet. When the experience ended and they returned to normal consciousness, they sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, Joseph Crowfeather spoke, his voice filled with wonder. That was beyond anything I've experienced in 60 years of spiritual practice. Dr. Thornfield nodded approvingly. And that was just your first taste of what plant consciousness can teach you. Over the coming days, you'll learn to work with the intelligence of minerals, with the consciousness of water, with the living awareness that exists within the human body itself. He stood, brushing earth from his clothes. But first, you need to integrate what you've just learned. Spend the rest of the day in the garden, practicing communication with different plants. Learn to distinguish between the various types of plant consciousness. Understand how their different forms of awareness can contribute to the healing process. As they dispersed throughout the garden, each drawn to different plants that seemed to call to them specifically, Dr. Whitehorse remained seated beside the teacher plant. The information he had received was still processing through his consciousness, reshaping his understanding of medicine, of life, of the very nature of reality itself. He realized now that their journey to find the Mountain Lord had been more than a desperate search for healing knowledge. It had been the beginning of a complete transformation of their understanding of what it meant to be healers in a universe where consciousness was the fundamental creative force. The sun climbed higher over the valley, and in its impossible light, the garden revealed new wonders with each passing moment. Dr. Whitehorse touched the earth beneath his hands and felt the vast intelligence that flowed through all things, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be partnered with in the great work of healing. Their education had truly begun. 3 days had passed since their first encounter with the teacher plant, and Dr. Samuel Whitehorse felt as though he was living in a completely different universe. Each morning brought new revelations that shattered another layer of his conventional understanding, replacing mechanistic certainties with quantum possibilities that defied every principle he had learned in medical school. This morning, Dr. Marcus Thornfield led them to a section of the valley they hadn't seen before, a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside, where crystalline formations jutted from the earth like frozen lightning. At the center stood what appeared to be a perfect mirror, but as they approached, Dr. Whitehorse realized it wasn't reflecting their physical forms. Instead, it showed swirling patterns of energy, light configurations that seemed to pulse and shift with their own intelligence. "What you see before you is what I call the quantum mirror," Dr. Thornfield announced, his voice carrying an edge of solemnity that hadn't been present in their previous lessons. "It doesn't show you what you look like, it shows you what you are. The energy patterns that constitute your true being, the frequency signatures that determine your capacity for healing, the quantum entanglements that connect you to every other living system in the universe." Elena Spotted Horse stepped closer to the mirror, gasping as she saw herself represented not as flesh and bone, but as a complex mandala of spinning light. Colors she had no names for wove themselves into patterns that seemed to extend far beyond the boundaries of her physical body. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "but also damaged. There are dark spots, places where the light doesn't flow properly. Those are the scars left by trauma, by limiting beliefs, by the cumulative effect of living in a culture that denies the reality of what you truly are," Dr. Thornfield explained. "Every healer carries such wounds. It's impossible to grow up in modern civilization without accumulating damage to your energetic structure. But here's what conventional medicine doesn't understand. You cannot effectively heal others while your own energy field remains fragmented." Thomas Red Cloud approached the mirror with the cautious respect of someone approaching the sacred altar. His reflection showed a pattern dominated by earth tones, browns, golds, deep greens, but shot through with jagged lines of red that pulsed with agitated rhythm. "What are those red lines?" "Anger," Dr. Thornfield said simply. "Specifically, anger at the historical injustices inflicted upon your people. Anger at the poverty and suffering you see every day on the reservation. Anger at your own perceived failures as a healer. That anger is poisoning your ability to focus, healing intention effectively." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He had spent years believing his anger was justified, even righteous. The idea that it might be interfering with his healing work had never occurred to him. Maria Blackbird's reflection in the mirror showed a pattern of incredible beauty marred by what looked like torn fabric gaps in her energy field that seemed to drain light away into emptiness. "What happened to me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Thornfield's expression softened with compassion. "Grief," he said gently. "The accumulated grief of losing so many patients over the years, of watching your medicine lose its power, of feeling helpless in the face of suffering you couldn't prevent. Grief creates holes in the energy field through which healing power leaks away." One by one, each healer confronted their reflection in the quantum mirror. Robert Standing Bear saw his pattern disrupted by crystalline structures that looked like ice, the frozen emotional state he had adopted to protect himself from feeling too deeply. David Iron Shell's reflection showed geometric rigidity, where there should have been flowing curves. His engineering mind's need to understand and control everything, creating barriers to intuitive healing. Sarah Windwalker's pattern was perhaps the most disturbing, beautiful spirals of healing energy that seemed to flow outward endlessly, with almost nothing flowing back to nourish her own being. You're what we call an energetic martyr, Dr. Thornfield observed. You give everything to others and leave nothing for yourself. It's a form of spiritual bypassing that ultimately serves no one. When Joseph Crowfeather stepped before the mirror, his reflection showed a pattern of ancient beauty overlaid with what looked like cobweb sticky, gray entanglements that obscured his natural radiance. Tradition carried too rigidly becomes limitation, Dr. Thornfield explained. Your reverence for the old ways has become attachment to specific forms, rather than understanding of underlying principles. You're trying to heal with museum pieces, instead of living knowledge. Finally, Dr. Whitehorse approached the mirror, dreading what he might see. His reflection showed a pattern split down the middle one half, flowing with the organic curves of natural healing energy. The other side dominated by mechanical grids and linear structures. The two halves seemed to be at war with each other, creating a chaotic interference pattern that prevented either from functioning effectively. The healer's dilemma in the modern world, Dr. Thornfield observed. You understand both conventional medicine and traditional healing, but you've never learned to integrate them into a coherent whole. The conflict between these two worldviews is literally tearing your energy field apart. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of unwelcome self-knowledge. Each person grappled with seeing themselves not as they imagined they were, but as they actually existed at the most fundamental level of being. This is devastating, Alina said finally. How can we help anyone when we're this damaged ourselves? This is why you're here, Dr. Thornfield replied. Not to learn techniques or formulas, but to heal yourself so completely that you become pure channels for healing consciousness. What you've just seen in the mirror isn't judgment, it's diagnosis. And like any diagnosis, it's the first step toward effective treatment. He gestured toward the crystalline formation surrounding the amphitheater. These crystals are not decorative. They're tools for restructuring energy fields, for repairing the damage you've accumulated over years of living disconnected from your true nature. But using them effectively requires you to release every attachment to who you think you are. Dr. Thornfield approached one of the larger crystal formations, a towering spire of clear quartz that seemed to hum with its own frequency. Crystals are consciousness frozen into geometric form. They hold specific patterns of information, specific frequencies of energy that can realign disorganized systems. But they're not passive tools. They're intelligent beings that choose whether or not to work with you based on your level of coherence and purity of intention. Thomas Red Cloud looked skeptical. Crystals are minerals. They don't have consciousness. Everything has consciousness, Dr. Thornfield said patiently. Consciousness is not something that emerges from complex organization. It's the fundamental organizing principle that creates complex organization in the first place. The consciousness of a crystal is different from the consciousness of a plant, which is different from the consciousness of an animal, but it's consciousness nonetheless. He placed his hand on the crystal spire, and immediately the entire formation began to glow with soft light. When you approach crystal consciousness with respect and genuine need, it will share its knowledge with you. Crystals are living libraries of geometric information. They know how to create perfect order from chaos, how to transform random energy into coherent patterns. Maria Blackbird approached a cluster of amethyst formations, their purple surfaces reflecting the strange light of the valley. How do we learn to work with them? The same way you learn to work with plant consciousness, Dr. Thornfield replied. Through relationship, through communication, through the willingness to dissolve the illusion of separation between yourself and the mineral intelligence you're working with. He began to guide them through what he called crystal communion, a process of extending their awareness into the geometric consciousness of the mineral beings surrounding them. Unlike the flowing, organic awareness of plants, crystal consciousness was precise, mathematical, focused on pattern and structure and the transformation of energy. Through geometric principles, Dr. Whitehorse found himself in communion with a Formation of clear quartz that seemed to understand the exact nature of his divided energy field. Information flowed into his awareness not about healing techniques, but about the fundamental unity underlying all approaches to healing. He began to understand how conventional medicine and traditional healing were not opposites, but complementary. Aspects of a larger wholeness. The crystal showed him how to restructure his own energy field, how to integrate the linear precision of scientific thinking with the flowing intuition of spiritual healing. As the integration occurred, he felt a profound sense of relief, as if two warring parts of himself had finally made peace. Around him, the other healers were having similar experiences. Alina's communion with a rose quartz formation was healing the damage in her energy field, filling the dark spots with gentle pink light that restored the natural flow of healing power through her being. Thomas was working with a formation of black tourmaline that was literally pulling the angry red energy out of his system, transmuting it into grounded earth energy that could be used for healing rather than destruction. Maria's experience was the most dramatic. Her communion with a massive formation of moldavita, crystal formed from meteoric impact, was not only healing her grief, but showing her how to transform the experience of loss into deeper wisdom and compassion. The holes in her energy field weren't just being filled, they were being rewoven into a pattern of even greater beauty and effectiveness. What you're experiencing now is energetic surgery, Dr. Thornfield explained as they worked. The crystals are literally rewriting the quantum code of your energy fields, removing distortions and implanting new patterns that will allow healing energy to flow through you with unprecedented clarity and power. The process was intense, sometimes painful, as years of accumulated damage were dissolved and replaced with new structures. Robert's emotional ice was being melted and replaced with flowing water energy. David's rigid geometric patterns were being softened into organic curves that could respond intuitively to each unique healing situation. Sarah's pattern of energetic martyrdom was being transformed into a balanced flow that could give and receive. In equal measure, Joseph's experience was perhaps the most profound. The ancient cobwebs that had been obscuring his natural healing abilities were being cleared away, but not replaced with something new. Instead, the crystals were revealing the pristine pattern that had always existed beneath the accumulated layers of tradition and expectation, a pattern of such pure healing potential that it took his breath away. When the crystal communion ended and they returned to normal awareness, each person felt fundamentally changed. The damage they had seen in the quantum mirror had been not just healed, but transformed into sources of greater strength and wisdom. "Look now," Dr. Thornfield said, gesturing toward the mirror. Their reflections had been completely transformed. Where before there had been damage, fragmentation, and interference patterns, now there were coherent mandalas of pure light. Each person's pattern was unique, reflecting their individual gifts and capacities, but all shared a quality of clarity and power that hadn't been present before. "Now you're ready for the real work," Dr. Thornfield said, his voice carrying a note of anticipation. "Tomorrow, we'll begin learning how to use your restored energy fields to perform healings that will seem impossible by conventional standards. You'll discover what it means to be a healer whose power comes not from techniques or substances, but from the fundamental forces that organize reality itself." As the sun set over the Valley of Echoes, painting the crystalline formations in shades of gold and crimson, the 8 healers sat in contemplative silence. They had come seeking knowledge to restore their failing medicine. Instead, they had been restored themselves, transformed into something far greater than they had ever imagined possible. The real test still lay ahead, learning to use their newfound clarity and power in service of healing a world that desperately needed what they were becoming. But for the first time since their confession in Dr. Whitehorse's office, they felt equal to the task that awaited them. The morning of the 7th day in the Valley of Echoes brought with it an urgency that hadn't existed before. Dr. Samuel Whitehorse woke to find Dr. Marcus Thornfield standing at the foot of his bed. The mountain lord's usually calm demeanor replaced by an intensity that sent electricity through the air. "We have a situation," Dr. Thornfield announced without preamble. "A real patient, a real crisis, and your first opportunity to apply everything you've learned. But I must warn you, what you're about to face will test not just your newfound abilities, but your willingness to step completely beyond the boundaries of conventional reality." Within minutes, the 7 healers had assembled outside the cabin, their energy fields still glowing with the coherent patterns restored by their crystal communion. The transformation in their appearance was remarkable. Each person seemed to radiate a subtle luminescence, as if lit from within by their own healing potential. "Follow me," Dr. Thornfield said, leading them toward a part of the valley they hadn't explored before. As they walked, the landscape around them shifted in ways that defied geographical logic. Paths appeared where none had existed moments before. Distances compressed and expanded according to some inner necessity, and the very air seemed to thicken with anticipation. They emerged into a clearing where a small aircraft sat incongruously. On the mountain grass, a medical helicopter that looked like it had been through a violent storm. Its rotors were bent, its fuselage cracked, and emergency equipment lay scattered around the crash site. But it was the figure lying motionless beside the wreckage that commanded their immediate attention. A young Native American woman, perhaps 25 years old, lay unconscious on a makeshift stretcher. Her skin had the waxy pallor of someone hovering between life and death, and even from a distance, Dr. Whitehorse could see the irregular rise and fall of her chest that indicated severe trauma. Blood seeped through makeshift bandages, and her left leg was bent at an angle that suggested multiple fractures. "This is Rebecca Thunderheart," Dr. Thornfield said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine concern. "She's a nurse from the Pine Ridge Reservation who was being airlifted to Denver for emergency surgery when the helicopter encountered the electromagnetic anomalies that surround this valley. She has perhaps 2 hours before her injuries become irreversible." Elena Spotted Horse immediately moved toward the patient, her medical training taking over. "We need to get her to a hospital immediately. These injuries are beyond anything we can treat in the field. The nearest hospital is 4 hours away by conventional transportation," Dr. Thornfield replied. "And conventional transportation cannot leave this valley until the electromagnetic storm that brought her here subsides. That won't happen for at least 12 hours. Dr. Whitehorse knelt beside Rebecca, his enhanced awareness allowing him to perceive not just her physical condition, but the energetic patterns underlying her trauma. What he saw made his enhanced abilities reel in shock. This wasn't just mechanical injury from the crash. Her entire energy field was fragmenting, dissolving, like a photograph exposed to acid. "She's dying at the quantum level," he said, his voice tight with professional concern, mixed with metaphysical understanding he couldn't have imagined possessing a week earlier. "Her consciousness is disconnecting from her physical form. Even if we could repair all the physical damage, we might not be able to prevent her from simply departing." Thomas Red Cloud approached with the focused intensity of a traditional healer assessing a spiritual crisis. "She's caught between worlds," he said quietly. "Part of her wants to cross over, to join the ancestors. The trauma has created a pathway that makes death seem easier than the struggle to heal." Dr. Thornfield nodded grimly. "This is why I brought you here. Not just to learn techniques, but to discover whether you can become the kind of healers this world desperately needs. Healers who can work miracles not through supernatural intervention, but through the conscious application of natural laws that most people don't yet understand." Maria Blackbird was examining the crash site, her enhanced perception revealing details that ordinary sight would miss. "There's something else," she said, her voice troubled. "The electromagnetic disturbance that brought down this helicopter, it's not natural. Someone or something is actively interfering with the energy patterns of this valley. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the valley. Through the morning mist, the dark shapes of military helicopters appeared, circling the valley like predatory birds. A voice boomed across the landscape, amplified by powerful speakers. "This is Colonel James Morrison, United States Army Medical Research Command. We know you have our patient. Release her immediately and surrender yourselves for questioning regarding unauthorized medical experimentation." Dr. Thornfield's expression hardened. "And there's our external pressure," he said grimly. "The government has been tracking unusual electromagnetic signatures coming from this valley for months. Rebecca's crash has given them the excuse they needed to investigate." Robert Standing Bear looked up at the circling helicopters with the expression of someone who had seen too many government interventions on reservation lands. "They're not here for the patient," he said bitterly. "They're here for you for whatever knowledge you possess. The girl is just their excuse." "Which means," Dr. Thornfield said, "that you have perhaps 30 minutes to accomplish what would normally require hours of surgery, days of healing, and weeks of recovery. You must heal her completely, restore her not just to stability, but to perfect health, before those helicopters land and take her away." Sarah Windwalker stared at the impossible task before them. "How can we possibly accomplish that?" "By remembering what you truly are," Dr. Thornfield replied. "You are not individuals working separately. You are aspects of a single healing consciousness, temporarily focused through different forms. When you work together with perfect coherence, you become a force that can literally restructure reality at the molecular level." He gestured toward Rebecca's unconscious form. "This young woman is not separate from you. At the quantum level, her atoms are composed of the same consciousness as yours. Her healing is not something you will do to her, it's something you will do as her, through her, with her full participation at the soul level." The helicopters were descending now, their rotors creating a storm of wind and sound that seemed to press against the very fabric of the valley's peace. Dr. Whitehorse realized that everything they had learned, every transformation they had undergone, had been preparation for this moment. "Form a circle around her," Dr. Thornfield instructed. "Connect your energy fields into a single unified matrix. Elena, you'll anchor the physical healing. Thomas, you'll work with the spiritual components. Maria, you'll handle the emotional trauma. Robert, you'll provide stability and grounding. David, you'll maintain the geometric precision needed for cellular reconstruction. Sarah, you'll regulate the energy flow to prevent burnout. Joseph, you'll serve as the wisdom keeper, ensuring that what we do serves the highest good. And Dr. Whitehorse," he continued, "you'll serve as the bridge between conventional medical understanding and quantum healing principles. Your consciousness will guide the integration of scientific knowledge with spiritual power." They arranged themselves around Rebecca's unconscious form, each person taking their position with the gravity of soldiers preparing for battle. Dr. Whitehorse could feel the energy fields of the other healers beginning to resonate with his own, creating a growing sense of unified purpose that seemed to push back against the chaos of the approaching helicopters. "Remember," Dr. Thornfield said, his voice carrying over the increasing noise, "you are not trying to fix something that is broken. You are revealing the perfect wholeness that exists beneath the appearance of damage. Rebecca's true self, her quantum blueprint, is completely intact. You are simply helping her physical form remember how to align with that perfection." The first helicopter touched down at the edge of the clearing, disgorging soldiers in biohazard suits who began moving toward them with urgent determination. But as the 8 healers joined their consciousness into a single focused intention, something extraordinary began to happen. The air around Rebecca's body began to shimmer with visible energy. Light seemed to flow from the healer's hands, creating patterns of luminescence that spiraled around the patient's form like living mandalas. Dr. Whitehorse felt his medical knowledge merging seamlessly with quantum understanding, allowing him to perceive exactly which cellular structures needed regeneration and how to guide the healing energy to accomplish that reconstruction. Elena's consciousness became one with Rebecca's cardiovascular system, her intention directing the repair of damaged blood vessels and the restoration of normal circulation. Thomas worked with the spiritual aspect of the trauma, calling Rebecca's soul back from the threshold of death and anchoring it firmly in her healing body. Maria's awareness dissolved the psychic shock that had fragmented Rebecca's emotional body, replacing terror with peace. The soldiers were advancing across the clearing now, their weapons drawn, their voices shouting commands that seemed to come from another universe entirely. But the healers were operating in a realm beyond ordinary time and space, where the fundamental forces of healing consciousness could work without interference from external chaos. Robert's grounding energy provided the stable foundation that allowed the other healers to work with maximum effectiveness. David's geometric precision ensured that every cell, every bone, every organ was reconstructed according to the perfect template of Rebecca's original design. Sarah's energy regulation prevented any of the healers from becoming overwhelmed by the intensity of the process, while Joseph's wisdom kept them aligned with the highest possible outcome. Dr. Whitehorse watched in amazement as Rebecca's broken legs straightened and healed, as her internal injuries vanished, as her vital signs stabilized and strengthened. But more than physical healing was occurring. Her entire energy field was being restored to a state of luminous perfection that made her appear to glow with inner light. The soldiers had reached the edge of their circle now, but something was preventing them from approaching any closer. The unified field of healing consciousness created by the 8 healers had formed a barrier that conventional weapons and authority could not penetrate. The soldiers stood frozen, their expressions confused, as if they couldn't quite remember why they had come. With a sudden intake of breath, Rebecca Thunderheart's eyes opened. She sat up smoothly, effortlessly, her movements fluid and graceful. The injuries that had been threatening her life moments before had vanished completely, leaving not even scars to mark their passage. What happened? She asked, her voice clear and strong. I remember the helicopter going down, but ... She looked around at the circle of healers, at the soldiers standing motionless nearby, at Dr. Thornfield watching with obvious satisfaction. This isn't possible. Possibility is just another limitation waiting to be transcended, Dr. Thornfield replied with a smile. You have just experienced what healing looks like when it's not constrained by beliefs about what medicine can and cannot accomplish. Rebecca stood, testing her restored body with the wonder of someone experiencing a miracle. Every movement was perfect, every system functioning at optimal capacity. She was not just healed but enhanced, her entire being radiating a vitality that seemed to illuminate the air around her. The spell that had held the soldiers in place suddenly broke. Colonel Morrison himself approached the circle, his expression a mixture of disbelief and professional concern. What did you do to her? He demanded. Our sensors show that she was critically injured, possibly dying. Now she appears to be in perfect health. We restored her to the state of perfect wholeness that is her natural birthright, Dr. Thornfield replied calmly. We used no technology, no pharmaceuticals, no invasive procedures. We simply remembered how to work with the fundamental forces that organize and maintain life. Colonel Morrison's gaze moved from Rebecca's obviously perfect health to the 8 healers, whose energy fields still glowed with residual healing power. This is impossible, he said. People don't heal from critical injuries in minutes. People who understand the quantum nature of reality do, Dr. Thornfield replied. And these healers have just demonstrated that such understanding can be taught, learned, and applied effectively even in crisis situations. The standoff continued for several tense moments, military authority confronting a demonstration of healing power that challenged every assumption about the nature of medicine and the limits of human potential. Finally, Colonel Morrison made a decision that surprised everyone present. "Stand down," he ordered his soldiers. "Whatever happened here, the patient is obviously in perfect health. Our mission was medical evacuation, and that's no longer necessary." As the military forces withdrew, Rebecca Thunderheart approached the circle of healers who had saved her life. "I don't understand what you did," she said, "but I can feel that. I'm not just healed, I'm changed. There's something different about me now, something ... more." Dr. Thornfield nodded approvingly. "The healing you received wasn't just repair of damage. It was an initiation into a higher level of human potential. You now carry within your cellular structure the templates for perfect health, enhanced awareness, and expanded consciousness." He turned to address the 8 healers, whose energy fields were slowly returning to normal, but who remained fundamentally transformed by what they had accomplished together. "And you have just proven that the kind of healers this world needs already exist. You have demonstrated that conventional medicine and quantum healing can work together to accomplish what neither could achieve alone." The sun was climbing toward its zenith over the Valley of Echoes, and Dr. Whitehorse realized that their time of learning was coming to an end. They had found what they came seeking, not just knowledge, but transformation into the kind of healers who could bring hope to a world where the old medicine was failing and the new medicine had not yet been born. But their greatest test still lay ahead, returning to their people and their communities, carrying with them healing abilities that would seem impossible to those who had not witnessed them, and finding ways to integrate quantum healing principles into a world still dominated by mechanistic thinking. The real work was just beginning. Valley of Echoes looked different in the pre-dawn darkness as Dr. Samuel Whitehorse loaded the last of their equipment into the trucks. After 2 weeks of transformation that felt like lifetimes, they were preparing to return to the world they had left behind, but they were no longer the same people who had arrived desperate and defeated. The 7 healers moved with a quiet confidence that seemed to alter the very air around them, their enhanced energy fields creating subtle distortions in the morning mist. Dr. Marcus Thornfield stood beside his cabin, no longer the mysterious mountain lord, but a colleague and friend who had guided them through the most profound transformation of their lives. Yet even now, Dr. Whitehorse sensed there were depths to the man they had barely begun to explore, knowledge and experiences that stretched far beyond what he had shared with them. "Remember," Dr. Thornfield said as they gathered for their final instructions, "what you have learned here must be integrated gradually into your practice. The world you're returning to is not ready for the full demonstration of quantum healing principles. You must become bridges between what is and what is possible." Rebecca Thunderheart had chosen to remain in the valley for extended training, her miraculous healing having awakened abilities that Dr. Thornfield wanted to develop further. She stood beside him now, her energy field so radiant that she seemed to glow in the dim light. Her presence served as a living reminder of what they had accomplished together. "How do we explain what happened to her when we return to the reservation?" Elena Spotted Horse asked, voicing the concern they all shared. "People saw her being airlifted out in critical condition. If she suddenly appears completely healed, there will be questions we can't answer." Dr. Thornfield smiled knowingly. "Rebecca will return to Pine Ridge in 6 months, through conventional channels that will provide a believable cover story for her recovery. By then, you will have had time to begin demonstrating your enhanced abilities in ways that prepare people for her return." Joseph Crowfeather approached Dr. Thornfield with the gravity of an elder recognizing a greater elder. "How do we honor what you've taught us without claiming powers we haven't earned? Our people have suffered too much from false promises and fake medicine men." "By never claiming to have powers at all," Dr. Thornfield replied. "What you've learned is not supernatural ability, it's natural human potential that has been suppressed by cultural conditioning. When you heal someone, you're not performing magic. You're helping them remember how to access their own innate healing intelligence. Thomas Red Cloud loaded a carefully wrapped bundle into his truck plants from Dr. Thornfield's garden that would continue their education once they returned home. What about the traditional healers who didn't come with us? How do we share this knowledge without seeming to claim superiority over them? You teach by example, not by instruction, Dr. Thornfield said. When your results speak for themselves, others will ask to learn. When they're ready, they'll find their way here or to other teachers who carry this knowledge. The network of quantum healers is growing worldwide, though most work in secret for now. Maria Blackbird placed a hand on her heart, feeling the crystalline clarity that had replaced the grief-damaged patterns of her former energy field. What if we fail? What if we return to the reservation and our abilities don't work as they did here? Then you'll remember that healing is not about success or failure. It's about showing up with complete presence and unconditional love. Dr. Thornfield replied, "The techniques you've learned are tools, but the real medicine is who you've become. That transformation is permanent." As the sun began to rise over the valley, painting the impossible landscape in shades of gold and crimson, the 8 healers performed one final ceremony together. They stood in a circle around the crystalline formation where they had first been healed, their energy fields weaving together into a mandala of light that seemed to bless everything it touched. Dr. Whitehorse felt the profound sense of completion that comes at the end of a hero's journey, but also the weight of responsibility for carrying their new knowledge back into a world that desperately needed it. They were no longer students but teachers, no longer seekers, but finders who had discovered treasures that must be shared. The drive down from the mountains was a journey, not just through space, but through levels of reality. As they descended from the rarefied atmosphere of the valley, the everyday world gradually reasserted itself. Cell phone signals returned, GPS devices began functioning again, and the landscape resumed the familiar appearance of ordinary Colorado countryside, but the healers themselves remained changed. David Iron Shell noticed that his truck's engine ran more smoothly than it ever had before, as if his enhanced energy field was somehow optimizing its mechanical function. Sarah Windwalker observed that wildlife seemed drawn to their convoy birds flying alongside their vehicles, deer standing peacefully by the roadside to watch them pass. They stopped for lunch at a small diner in a mountain town, their first interaction with people outside the valley since their transformation began. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and obvious arthritis in her hands, seemed to brighten just from serving them. By the time they left, her pain had noticeably decreased and her energy had visibly improved. "We're doing that, aren't we?" Elena said as they returned to their trucks. "Just being around us is helping people heal." "Healing consciousness is contagious," Robert Standing Bear replied, remembering Dr. Thornfield's teachings. "When we maintain coherent energy fields, we create a field effect that helps others access their own healing potential." The journey back to Pine Ridge took 2 days, with overnight stops that became informal healing clinics as word spread through the small communities they passed. They didn't advertise their abilities or make any claims, but somehow people in need found their way to them. A child with asthma whose breathing improved after Maria sang a traditional song. An elderly man whose diabetes symptoms lessened after Thomas shared a cup of the specially prepared water from the valley. Dr. Whitehorse found himself integrating his medical knowledge with quantum principles in ways that seemed to happen naturally. When a young mother brought her feverish baby to him at a truck stop, he found himself able to perceive not just the physical symptoms but the energetic patterns underlying the illness. His treatment combined conventional pediatric care with subtle energy adjustments that accelerated the healing process dramatically. How do we document this? He wondered aloud as they resumed their journey. How do we create a bridge between what we can do now and what conventional medicine accepts as possible? "Carefully," Joseph replied. "My grandmother used to say that new medicine must be wrapped in old words, at least at first. We present our enhanced results as improvements in traditional technique, not as something entirely new. As they drove through the familiar landscape of South Dakota, approaching the reservation where their journey had begun, each healer contemplated the challenge ahead. They carried within themselves healing abilities that could transform their community, but they also carried the responsibility of using those abilities wisely. The Pine Ridge Reservation appeared unchanged as they drove through the boundaries that marked their homeland. The same poverty, the same struggling infrastructure, the same signs of a people caught between worlds. But now they saw it with different eyes, not as problems to be fixed, but as opportunities for healing to manifest. News of their return had preceded them. Families began gathering at the tribal clinic even before they could unload their trucks, drawn by hopes they couldn't quite articulate, but somehow knew had been fulfilled. Children who had been sick when they left were brought forward by grandmothers who sensed that something fundamental had changed. Dr. Whitehorse unlocked the clinic doors with hands that still glowed faintly with healing energy. The familiar sterile smell of the medical facility seemed harsh after the pure air of the valley, but he no longer saw it as a limitation. This building, these tools, this infrastructure could all become conduits for the new medicine they carried. The first patient was a teenage boy with severe diabetes, whose condition had worsened dramatically in their absence. Conventional treatment would have required immediate hospitalization, but as the 8 healers gathered around him, Dr. Whitehorse felt their unified consciousness creating the same field of healing potential they had generated in the valley. Working together but appearing to use only traditional methods, they guided the boy's energy field back into coherent patterns. Alina monitored his vital signs while Thomas performed a traditional healing song. Maria prepared herbal remedies, infused with quantum-enhanced intention, while Robert provided spiritual counseling to address the emotional components of the illness. David documented everything with scientific precision, creating records that would appear normal to outside inspection, while coding the true methods they were using. Sarah regulated the energy flow to prevent the healing from proceeding so rapidly that it would raise questions, while Joseph provided the wisdom needed to ensure their intervention served the boy's highest good. Dr. Whitehorse integrated conventional medical monitoring with quantum diagnostic techniques, creating a seamless blend of old and new that allowed them to work miracles while maintaining plausible deniability. Within hours, the boy's blood sugar had stabilized, his energy had returned, and his body was showing signs of regenerating its insulin-producing capacity. Word spread quickly through the reservation community. By evening, a line of patients stretched around the building, people who had lost hope in both traditional and modern medicine, but somehow sensed that something new was being offered. Healers worked late into the night, each case building their confidence in their ability to function as quantum healers in the everyday world. But it was the arrival of Colonel Morrison that truly tested their integration of new abilities with old realities. The military officer appeared at the clinic the next morning, ostensibly for a routine follow-up on Rebecca Thunderheart's case, but obviously conducting surveillance on their activities. "Interesting results you're achieving here," he said, studying charts that showed impossible recovery rates. "Your success statistics have improved dramatically since your return from Colorado." Dr. Whitehorse met the colonel's gaze with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. "We attended a continuing education conference on integrative medicine techniques. The combination of traditional healing with enhanced conventional protocols is showing promising results." Colonel Morrison examined a chart showing the diabetic teenager's rapid improvement. "This level of recovery typically takes months, not hours. Traditional medicine works much faster when properly applied," Joseph Crowfeather said with the authority of his years. "Our ancestors achieved remarkable results because they understood principles that modern medicine is only beginning to rediscover." The colonel spent the day observing their work, taking notes, asking questions, clearly trying to understand how they were achieving results that challenged everything he thought he knew about medicine. But their integration of quantum healing with conventional approaches was so seamless that even close scrutiny revealed nothing that could be definitively labeled as extraordinary. As evening fell, Colonel Morrison prepared to leave, his investigation inconclusive but his suspicions far from satisfied. "We'll be monitoring your progress with great interest," he said. "The government is always eager to learn about breakthrough medical techniques that could benefit military medicine." After he left, the 8 healers gathered in the clinic's break room, exhaustion from maintaining their careful balance finally catching up with them. They had successfully demonstrated that quantum healing could be practiced within conventional medical settings, but the constant vigilance required was demanding. "This is going to be harder than I thought," Elena admitted. "Constantly hiding what we're really doing, always having to provide conventional explanations for quantum results." "But we're doing it," Maria pointed out. "People are healing who would have died or suffered needlessly. That's worth any amount of careful maneuvering." Dr. Whitehorse looked around at his colleagues, no longer the desperate, defeated healers who had confessed their failures in this same room weeks earlier, but transformed practitioners carrying hope back to their people. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in years, he felt genuinely optimistic about their ability to heal their community. Outside the clinic windows, the South Dakota night stretched toward a horizon where new possibilities were being born. In treatment rooms that looked exactly as they had before, miracles were becoming routine. And in the hearts of 8 healers who had journeyed to the edge of human potential and returned, the medicine of the future was taking root in the soil of ancient wisdom. Their greatest challenge lay not in learning to heal, but in learning to hope and to help their people remember that healing was always possible when approached with the right understanding of what it meant to be human in a universe where consciousness was the fundamental creative force. The revolution in healing had begun. Quietly, carefully, one patient at a time, 6 months had passed since their return from the Valley of Echoes, and Dr. Samuel Whitehorse stood before a gathering unlike any he had ever witnessed on the Pine Ridge Reservation. The tribal council chamber was packed beyond capacity, with people spilling out into the hallway and gathering around windows to hear what was being said inside. Representatives from 12 different tribes had traveled hundreds of miles to be here, along with carefully selected medical professionals, government officials, and even a delegation from the World Health Organization. The transformation of their small clinic had been impossible to hide. Recovery rates that defied medical explanation, healing times that compressed months into days, and most remarkably, the complete absence of treatment failures had drawn attention from across the medical establishment. What had begun as discreet quantum healing disguised as improved traditional medicine had evolved into something that could no longer be contained within conventional explanations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Whitehorse began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had journeyed to the edge of human potential and returned with proof that miracles were simply science waiting to be understood. "What you are about to witness challenges every assumption our civilization has made about the nature of healing, the limits of human consciousness, and the relationship between mind and matter." In the 6 months since their return, each of the 8 healers had become a walking demonstration of transformed human potential. Joseph Crowfeather, now approaching 74, moved with the vitality of a man half his age, his arthritis completely healed, his energy field so coherent that plants grew more vigorously in his presence. Maria Blackbird had not lost a single patient in 6 months, her grief-healed heart now capable of channeling healing love with surgical precision. Elena, Spotted Horse, had developed the ability to diagnose conditions with an accuracy that surpassed the most sophisticated medical equipment, her consciousness able to perceive disease patterns in their earliest stages when they could still be easily corrected. Thomas Red Cloud's anger-transformed energy now served as a powerful force for healing rather than destruction. his treatments carrying a quality of fierce compassion that could literally burn disease out of a patient's energy field. The changes in their community had been even more dramatic. Diabetes rates had plummeted as people learned to work with the quantum principles underlying blood sugar regulation. Cancer remission rates had reached levels that medical journals were calling statistically impossible. Mental health crises that had plagued the reservation for generations were resolving as people reconnected with healing practices that addressed the quantum foundations of consciousness itself, but perhaps most significantly, their success had attracted the return of Rebecca Thunderheart. She entered the council chamber now, 6 months after her miraculous healing in the valley, but she was no longer the nurse who had been critically injured in a helicopter crash. Her energy field blazed with such intensity that sensitive individuals in the audience gasped at her presence. She had become something unprecedented in human history, a fully actualized quantum healer whose abilities bridged every gap between conventional medicine and consciousness-based healing. 6 months ago, Rebecca said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly with the DNA of everyone present, I was dying from injuries that conventional medicine declared untreatable. Today, I stand before you not just healed, but transformed into something our ancestors always knew was possible, a human being operating at the full potential of our species. She gestured toward a patient who had been brought in specifically for this demonstration, a young man from the Lakota Nation who had been paralyzed from the waist down in a car accident 2 years earlier. Medical science had declared his condition permanent, his spinal cord too severely damaged for any hope of recovery. What you are about to witness is not a miracle, Rebecca continued. It is the application of natural laws that govern the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. Laws that our ancestors understood intuitively, that quantum physics is beginning to validate scientifically, and that we have learned to apply systematically for healing purposes. The 8 original healers arranged themselves around the paralyzed young man, their energy fields automatically synchronizing into the unified matrix they had perfected over months of practice. But now Rebecca joined them, her presence amplifying their collective potential to levels that seemed to alter the fundamental structure of space and time within the chamber. Dr. Whitehorse began the process by explaining what they were doing in terms that bridged scientific and spiritual understanding. Consciousness is not produced by the brain, he said, his hands beginning to glow with visible healing energy. Consciousness is the fundamental organizing principle of the universe. What we call physical reality is actually consciousness expressing itself through quantum fields that create the appearance of solid matter. As he spoke, the other healers began their work. Elena's awareness merged with the damaged spinal cord, perceiving not just the physical trauma but the quantum template of perfect neurological function that existed beneath the appearance of injury. Thomas used his transformed anger energy to literally burn away the scar tissue and inflammation that was preventing nerve regeneration. Maria's healed heart channeled unconditional love directly into the young man's cellular structure, providing the emotional foundation necessary for profound physical transformation. Robert's grounding energy ensured that the healing proceeded in perfect harmony with the patient's overall well-being, while David's geometric precision guided the reconstruction of damaged neural pathways according to their original blueprint. Sarah regulated the energy flow to prevent healing shock, while Joseph's wisdom ensured that the transformation served the young man's highest purpose rather than simply removing his physical limitation. Dr. Whitehorse integrated conventional neurological knowledge with quantum healing principles, monitoring both the medical and metaphysical aspects of the process. But it was Rebecca's presence that made the impossible become inevitable. Her consciousness had been so completely transformed by her own healing experience that she could literally rewrite reality at the quantum level. As the other healers prepared the foundation for healing, she reached into the 0-point field. where all possibilities exist simultaneously, and selected the timeline, where the young man's spinal cord had never been damaged. The audience watched in stunned silence as visible changes began occurring in the patient's body. His legs, which had shown no response to stimulation for 2 years, began to twitch with renewed nerve activity. Color returned to muscles that had atrophied from disuse. The energy field around his lower body, which had been dark and stagnant, suddenly blazed with renewed vitality. Within 20 minutes, the young man was not only moving his legs, but standing, walking, demonstrating perfect neurological function where none had existed moments before. Medical monitors confirmed what everyone could see: his spinal cord had been completely regenerated, his nervous system restored to optimal function. But the real transformation was not just physical. The young man's entire energy field had been upgraded, his consciousness expanded, his cellular structure optimized in ways that made him more than he had been, even before his accident. Like Rebecca before him, he had been initiated into a higher level of human potential through the healing process itself. The chamber erupted in a mixture of celebration, disbelief, and profound recognition that they had witnessed something that would change the world forever. Representatives from the World Health Organization were frantically taking notes. Government officials were making urgent phone calls, and tribal elders were weeping with joy at seeing their ancient knowledge validated and restored. Dr. Marcus Thornfield appeared at the back of the chamber, having arrived quietly during the demonstration. His presence seemed to anchor the extraordinary energies that had been unleashed, providing the stability needed for everyone present to integrate what they had witnessed. "What you have seen today," he said, his voice somehow carrying clearly throughout the packed room without amplification, represents the next stage of human evolution. Not evolution of the body, but evolution of consciousness, the awakening of abilities that have always existed within our species but have been suppressed by cultural conditioning that denies their possibility. He approached the front of the chamber, his energy field interacting with those of the 9 healers to create a mandala of light that seemed to bless everyone present. The 8 healers who began this journey as failures carrying only desperation and defeat have become pioneers of a new medicine that transcends every limitation our civilization has accepted as permanent. Colonel Morrison, who had been observing from the back of the room, stepped forward with the expression of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. "If these abilities are real," he said, "if this technology can be replicated and taught, the implications for military medicine, for human performance enhancement, for national security, are exactly why it must be shared freely rather than controlled by any government or institution." Dr. Thornfield interrupted smoothly. "Consciousness-based healing cannot be weaponized because it only functions through unconditional love and service to the highest good. Any attempt to use these principles for harm or control automatically destroys the coherence necessary for them to work." The tribal council chairman, an elderly man whose diabetes had been completely healed in the early days of the clinic's transformation, rose to address the gathering. "Our ancestors always knew that healing was possible when the right relationship was established between healer, patient, and the Great Spirit. What our visitors have helped us remember is that this relationship operates according to natural laws that can be understood, taught, and applied systematically." Over the following hours, the gathering evolved into an unprecedented collaboration between traditional healers, quantum physicists, medical researchers, and government officials. Plans were made for research institutes that would study consciousness-based healing while protecting it from exploitation. Training programs were designed to gradually introduce quantum healing principles into medical schools worldwide. Most importantly, networks were established to connect indigenous healing traditions from around the world with cutting-edge consciousness research, creating a global movement toward medicine that honored both ancient wisdom and modern understanding. As the formal gathering concluded and people began to disperse, Dr. Whitehorse found himself standing with his 7 colleagues outside the clinic, where their journey had begun. The building looked the same, but everything it represented had been transformed beyond recognition. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Alina asked, watching as vehicles filled with visitors began leaving the reservation, opening this knowledge to the world. "The knowledge was never ours to keep," Joseph replied with the wisdom of his years. "We were simply the vessels through which it chose to re-enter the world. Our ancestors would be proud that we remembered our responsibility to serve all people, not just our own." Rebecca Thunderheart approached their circle, her presence still radiating the impossible vitality that marked her as something new in human history. "The real work is just beginning," she said. "What happened here today will ripple out across the world, awakening others to possibilities they never imagined. But it will also create resistance from those who profit from the current medical paradigm." Dr. Thornfield, who had been quietly observing their conversation, stepped forward with an expression of profound satisfaction. "You have planted seeds that will grow into forests of healing," he said. "Not just physical healing, but the healing of the separation between science and spirituality, between conventional medicine and traditional wisdom, between human beings and their true potential." As the sun set over the reservation, painting the South Dakota sky in shades of gold and crimson, the 9 healers stood together in a final circle. They had journeyed from confession of failure to demonstration of miracles, from desperate seekers to pioneering teachers, from broken healers to quantum physicians whose abilities transcended every limitation their culture had taught them to accept. "Our medicine is no longer failing," Dr. Whitehorse said, echoing the words that had begun their transformation 6 months earlier. "Our medicine has remembered what it always was: consciousness expressing itself through love and service of healing." The stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over their ancestors for thousands of years, the same stars that had witnessed their transformation in the Valley of Echoes. But now those stars seemed to shine brighter, as if responding to the light that the healers themselves had become. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the reservation, the world was beginning to change. Medical schools would soon be teaching consciousness-based healing. Hospitals would begin integrating quantum principles with conventional protocols. Patients around the globe would discover that healing was possible even when hope had been abandoned. The confession of the 7 Sioux healers had become the catalyst for a revolution that would transform not just medicine, but humanity's understanding of its own limitless potential. And in the quiet moments after the crowds had departed and the ceremonies had ended, the 8 healers who had made it all possible stood together under the infinite stars, knowing that they had fulfilled their deepest purpose. They had helped their people remember who they truly were. And in doing so, they had helped all people remember that miracles were not violations of natural law, but applications of natural laws that most had forgotten were possible. The new medicine had been born. The age of quantum healing had begun. And the stars themselves seemed to sing with joy at what humanity was finally ready to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.